Biblical channel. We are awesomely glad you are here because, hey, this is the place where we just are beggars helping other beggars where to find bread. It's just people doing what people ought to be doing, and that is reading their Bibles, saying their prayers, getting together with other people, getting together to talk about God. We want to make talking about God easier. So we want to talk about God here so that you can talk about God there. And the Bible, when it's read correctly, oh my God, it is the best story ever played. To borrow ESPN's college football take, the best story ever played. The Bible is the best story ever played because it is God who is writing his story in history. And he doesn't favor anyone. He puts us all in the same category and he talks to us all the same way, but it's for our own good, and it's so that we can actually wring the chamois of this life out to its fullest. Nobody wants you to wring the chamois of life out to its fullest ability more than God. That's for sure. And the Bible is God playing out the best story possible. It's magical without magic. It's powerful because it involves everybody and it invites us to root for God. And yes, it's going to have some miracles along the way, but after all, it's a story about God. So I think we can handle that. Before we go any further, though, let's just do what we should be doing, and that is praying together. I like praying the way that peasant girl Mary, that God gave us, prays, because she seems stronger than most men that I know. And so she says, and we say, my soul magnifies the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God, my Savior. He has looked on the humble estate of his servant. He who is mighty and has done great things for me, holy is his name. His mercy is for those who fear him from generation to generation. He shows his strength by scattering the proud in the thoughts of their hearts. And he brings down the mighty from their thrones, and he exalts those of humble estate. He fills the hungry with good things. The rich he sends away empty. He helps his servant Israel in remembrance of his mercy. He spoke to our fathers, to Abraham, and to our offspring forever. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. And forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. There's the rub. Right on. Well, let's just jump right into it. Luke chapter 4, verse 1 to 15 is a scene that most people are familiar with. Jesus coming out of that baptismal scene with John the Baptist, after his genealogy has been read, which takes us back to Adam. We've got the Bible on our minds, and we should. But the very first thing that Jesus the very first thing Jesus does is he heads out into the wilderness for 40 days being tempted by the devil. There you go. You know what? We're going to look at the middle part of this, what happens between Jesus and the devil next week. What we want to just look at is just the fact that Jesus takes his first steps in the public ministry away from the public. And he heads out into the desert to be tempted by the devil. And he was there for 40 days. And he did not eat, and he was hungry. Of course he was. And then let's jump down to the end. How does this scene all end? How does it go? We hear Jesus returned in the power of the Spirit to Galilee. And a report about him went out throughout the surrounding country. He taught in their synagogues, being glorified by all. Opening scene, end scene. There's so much to talk about there. That's what we just want to talk about. Jesus' first step into the public limelight is actually away from the public and into the desert. And we want to read our Bible right. So, in reading our Bible right, we've got to pick up on the clues that old Uncle Luke and all the biblical writers are giving us. the biblical clues that Uncle Luke has spilled right into our laps. So does Matthew, and so does Mark, by the way. Uncle Matthew and Uncle Mark do the same thing. But in order to read your Bible right, you got to pick up on those clues. Wilderness, 40 days, temptation. That reminds us of a big story. That reminds us that the story we've been really watching is a story that unfolds in the book of Genesis. A story that unfolds at the very start of creation, a story that unfolds for all of us. Every single person is automatically brought into the story because it is the beginning. It is the beginning. And if you read the beginning, you read of God's creation, and then you read of God's first marriage, and then I call it the toilet flush. Chapter 3, everything swirls around the bowl and gets spit out of the garden into the septic tank. Well, anyhow, the real way to read our Bibles correctly is to always have that beginning in mind. And that's what Uncle Luke and all the biblical writers are doing with us, because that's what Jesus did with them too. He always took them back to how the story began and where it began. And where it began was with Adam and Eve, as we know them, with Noah, with the nation called Israel. And so from the moment that Adam and Eve in the garden decide that they know the difference between good and evil, that they can eat from that tree of the knowledge of good and evil because, well, they suspect that God is up to something no good and that they would be better off without God knowing good and evil. And it was a train wreck from that point on, and it is still a train wreck to this day. The reason is because without God, humanity, Adam and Eve, and all of us really are quite terrible at managing and understanding the timing of good and evil. We just really aren't good at it. And that's the point. And since we're not good at managing good and evil, that means we end up on the side of evil too quickly. Oh, of course, not all of us are Hitler, but all of us are Adam and Eve. It's impossible to read the Adam and Eve story and not feel your own humanity in the story. That's the reason why the story exists, so that you can feel the effect of your humanity in Adam and Eve. And when you feel your effect of humanity in Adam and Eve, then you also hear, the very words that God shared with Adam and Eve. And that is, we are going to need a serpent crusher. In the words of Genesis, we need someone. We need God. We need that serpent's head to be crushed. And God makes a promise to Eve that she will give birth to a son one day, that she will, as a woman, will give birth to a son one day in the distant future that will indeed crush evil, that the serpent might strike his heel, but the son of the woman is going to crush the head of evil. So that's what we're looking for. From the next page forward, we're asking that question. Is this the serpent crusher? Is this the evil crusher? Is this the evil crusher? Is it Abel? No, he gets killed. Is it Cain? No, he's evil. Is it Noah? Looks good for a little bit, but he doesn't end well. Is it King David? Is it every character that comes up in the storyline? Is it Abraham? Every character ends up failing in temptation in some way, shape, or form. And so therefore, they are not the ones who are going to crush evil. And ultimately, the Bible has a singular message. And the singular message is really easy to work out. We have a problem, and we need a solution to our problem. Our problem is evil, and we think we can handle it. We do know the difference between good and evil, and we think that we can handle good and evil without God. And we fail. And we fail miserably time and time again. And so really the whole narrative of the Bible is a very simple story. It is God versus evil. It is God making it very clear that knowing good and evil without God is indeed not going to work out very well at all. And it never does. And we know that. Nothing proves the Bible right more than this. Nothing is easier to see in our own lives and around the world more than this. And so why does Jesus go out into the desert to crush evil? Very easily, mind you. But why does he do that? Because that's what the story's always been about. And that's what the mission of Jesus is all about. You see, it is God's story and it's his to tell. People criticize the Bible over and over again, but they have nothing in its place. They have nothing to compare it to. The fact of the matter is, the main story about God versus evil is the very story that gets us too uncomfortable to pay much mind to. You see, there is nowhere else in the literature of human beings that singularly focuses on God versus evil and the promise that God makes to do away with evil once and for all. You will not find that in the ancient religions. You won't find that in the ancient temples. The ancient temples were like some sort of combination between Las Vegas and prostitution and, a mall, where you go buy stuff. They were like marketplaces and you could buy anything that you wanted to buy, even, some sex. That's the way the ancient temples were. The ancient temples weren't a place where people gathered to talk about good and evil and to train, the children up and families up in a way that made them more virtuous. No. None of the ancient temples did. I don't care where you are in the world. None of the ancient temples were focused on helping people know the difference between good and evil and rallying around good and not evil. None of the temples did. You won't find that in Rome or any of the other ancient, religions, the gods, etc., etc. You won't find that in the religions of the East as well. The religions of the East actually paint the picture that evil's a reality that you can't get rid of. In fact, all you need to do is balance it. It doesn't ever proclaim that evil needs to be done away with. Eastern religions just say it has to be managed. That's all. But it's going to, it's cool to always exist. The Bible is alone in this message. Evil needs to go. God is alone in his message in the Bible saying evil needs to go. Evil is our problem and evil has to go. You see, God is clear, but it makes us uncomfortable because we know the reality of it. The reality of it is that he's talking to us. He's talking to all humans. He's not talking to one group of humans. He's talking to all groups of humans, no matter how we divide ourselves and consider ourselves to be so different from one another. The Bible cuts through us. God cuts through us with the same message. We've got a problem, and it's called evil. Nothing surprised me more than when I became a Christian and my eyes literally were opened, metaphorically. My eyes were opened to this reality that everything was answered by one single answer. Sin, evil, I don't care what you call it. But I saw it. And as a new Christian, I was running around telling everybody else, I know the answer. You know why that's a problem? Because of sin. I couldn't believe how turned off Christians were at that answer. It was like, not really. I'm like, no, it is. It's just that easy. It's just that simple. But it's even a message that Christians often try to put off to the side. Why? Because we're human beings. That's why. And so that garden reality where humanity stares at the knowledge of good and evil and decides that it can know the difference between good and evil without God is how the Bible describes evil. It can't be done. And we demonstrate every single minute of every single day that we struggle with evil, that we really aren't very good at mastering evil. The Bible, its whole storyline involves many people over many, many years, a couple thousand years. The biblical story unfolds, but it's always the same. It's always the same. The problems, whether we're at the flood with Noah, or whether we're with Israel, that gets banished from the promised, land for 40 years and has to wander around until a whole generation of people die off, or whether we're with Israel whenever the Assyrians attack them from the north, or whether we're with Israel when the Babylonians attack them from the east. The problem is evil. The problem is that whether it's Israel or whether it's Adam and Eve or whether it's Noah or whether it's David or Solomon, they can't manage evil. What we need is exactly what God promised. We need a son of a woman who is going to crush evil once and for all. We need the problem of evil to be dealt with. And to turn the problem of evil over to human beings, we should know that's going to be a disaster because we show that that is going to be a disaster all the time. Take the United Nations, for instance. I don't know if you ever thought about the United Nations or not, but the United Nations actually has a beautiful message to it. It has a charter, and that charter to the United Nations, spells out this beautiful language that, oddly enough, sounds very much like our Declaration of Independence preamble and our Bill of Rights from our Constitution. It's not a coincidence. They were used, right? And so the message comes out very beautifully that human rights matter, that equality, compassion, consent, enlightenment, science, freedom, progress, it matters, that the dignity of the human being is worth everything, that this vision of the United Nations proclaims human worth is so valuable. But I don't know about you, but have you ever wondered, is the United Nations really doing a great job? Is the United Nations, I don't know if you've checked in lately, but are they really on track to making sure that human rights are going forward in the world? You better check your news. United Nations terrible at human rights. The United Nations is terrible at managing evil. The United Nations talks a good game, and I'm glad they talk a good game. And the only reason why they talk a good game is because of the enormous impact that Christianity has made on the world. Why do we all talk about equality, compassion, consent, enlightenment, science, freedom, progress, all of this stuff? Because Christianity talked about that. Jesus talked about that. Even Israel talked about that this was how the earth was to be managed. It took, Christianity to get people talking about these things. One of the things nobody ever admits to is that Christianity ended slavery. But here's the sad reality. Christians participated in slavery too. And of course, that's all that anybody can remember. But the only voice that came out of history, the only voice that came out of ancient history and history a couple hundred years ago that was against slavery was the voice of Christianity, the voice of Jesus Christ. He literally changed the world. And now we're playing a game like the UN does. We're playing a game and we're pretending like we can do this. We can do equality and compassion and consent and enlightenment and science and freedom and progress without God. We don't have to mention God. In fact, what we'll call it is crimes against humanity. But who is going to manage the crimes against humanity? Who gets to determine that? And why are crimes against humanity? See, the question is if you ask why, you will find yourself in a very awkward moment. Do you believe in human rights? Why, yes. Why? What are you, a Nazi? I mean, if you ask the question, why do we believe in human rights? You will quickly be accused of either being a Nazi or racist, because the implication is, well, don't you understand? It's because of human rights. Like the question is the answer. That's the way we handle it. We pretend like, out of nowhere, we've always been talking about compassion and consent and enlightenment and freedom and progress, these kind of things. The fact is, we haven't been talking about those things. In fact, this whole language of crimes against humanity was invented by Christians. Invented by Christians who had in, the United States and in European, nations and their influences had ended slavery. And they had to ask themselves a question, well, how are we going to talk about this with, other religions like Islam and the Eastern religions? Because they aren't going to want to hear about Jesus. So how can we, tell them that slavery has to come to an end? Well, that's where the crimes against humanity language originated. It came out of an English bishop who said, hey, this is what we need to tell Islam. We need to tell Islam that slavery is a crime against humanity. And when Islam was presented with this information at first, Islam was like, you're nuts. You're crazy. We have the right to enslave others that Adam himself has given us. See, this is what humans do when humans are in control of human rights and trying to pretend like we're in control of evil. The elephant in the room that nobody wants to talk about is the question, why human rights? The question, why human rights, is easily answered in the Bible. Why human rights? Because we're all humans that God has created. God created us to be in his image. That powerful gift that he has given us, we have turned around and misused time and time again. And we do it all the time. And then we pretend like we didn't, but we do. Why? Because we're a bunch of jerks. All of us. The Bible talks straight. We talk crooked. We pretend like we are espousing lofty goals like God would. But we don't want God in the room when we talk about it. The Bible is absolutely clear. Slavery is never endorsed by God. Slavery is always endorsed by humanity. Wherever there has been slavery, it's humans saying, this is the way it has to be. And whenever there, are crimes against humanity, the Bible says that this is a crime. The Bible's been clear about virtues and good and evil. God has been clear about good and evil. He created us to know the difference between good and evil. But it's us trying to manage it without him that gets us all into trouble. I teach 8th graders, and I've got sad news for all of you. 8th graders tend to think that the UN means the time when the world un-Nazi'd the world. That's the way that most people think of the world. Oh, we don't need Satan anymore. We don't have to talk about Satan anymore like the Bible. Oh, that's antiquated. We don't need Satan. Do you know why we don't need Satan anymore? Because we have Hitler. There's your answer. Why human rights? Hitler. That's why. Ladies and gentlemen, that is not an answer. Why human rights? Hitler is the worst negative point of view that we could have. The answer, positively spoken, why human rights? Because God has created all humans, and that God has given worth and dignity to all human beings. That's been the biblical message from Genesis to Revelation. We are the great pretenders. We are the ones who pretend like we know what we're doing, and then we don't want to talk about how we fail at doing what we say we're doing. The fact of the matter is, the Bible makes it clear. We've all eaten from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And listen, the tree of knowledge of good and evil is not an apple tree. Good Lord. Talk about distortions. We all know good and evil. We do. And we all have some successes, but we all have failures with evil. The only one with a 100% track record with evil is God. We struggle with great effort against evil. Only God defeats evil with ease. Knowing God is the secret to success in defeating evil. Knowing God and knowing good is actually synonymous. Christians are not the heroes of the Bible. No way. Jesus is. Christians have the same problem with evil as the rest of the world and haven't stayed away from the wrong side of history. Sure, there were Christians who stood up against Hitler, but there were also Christians who took his side. There are always Christians on the wrong side of history, as those who don't like to talk about God like to use that phrase too. Crimes against humanity, being on the wrong side of history. Why? What are we talking about? Well, the answer is because God. Not because Hitler, because God. Because God is the only one who can defeat evil. God is the one who has promised to defeat evil. And that means we need God to step into history and to make good on his promise. And like I said, it's his story to tell. It's not our story to tell. It's God's story to tell, because he's the only one capable of actually sorting through the rubble of evil that we have created. Each and every one of us has contributed to the pile and the rubble of evil. And the only one who can sort out the mess is God. And so why does Jesus come onto the scene of history? And the very first thing that he does is he goes into the desert to be tempted by the devil. Not Hitler, by the devil. He goes out to be tempted by the devil in the wilderness, where we saw temptation fail. The 40 days, which reminds us that God will judge evil and is the judge of evil. And then returns. After dealing with Satan, he doesn't have to punch him in the nose. He just says a few words to him. Done. It makes it very clear. The opening scene of Jesus Christ makes it very clear that he has the power to defeat evil. Adam and Eve didn't. Noah did not. Even Abraham didn't. David did not. None of the characters of the Bible, none of the characters of Jesus' own disciples, no Christians, no, Israelites are the heroes of the Bible. The only hero of the Bible is God. And that's who Jesus Christ is. And that's why his big opening scene is going into the wilderness to give evil the flick. And literally, it doesn't take any effort. The Bible makes it very clear. It doesn't require sweat on God's brow to defeat evil. And because of that, he's the only one who can defeat evil. That's why we need him. That's why we need Jesus Christ. That's why we need God. And we need to stop playing games and talking when we talk about crimes against humanity and crimes, against our fellow man and being on the wrong side of history. We need to make it clear like God makes it clear. We need God and the goodness of God to stay away from evil. Jesus Christ is God who defeats evil. Plain and simple. Us, we're a bunch of jerks. And thankfully, God is so good that despite being a bunch of jerks, he creates a story, invites us into it. Now, Jesus will go on in his ministry and he will end his story by dying on a cross. Why? Once again, it's God's story to tell, to make it very clear that he came into this world to defeat evil, to deal with the one problem that we really do have. You might have 99 problems, but every 99 problems that you have has one problem, evil. And we need it dealt with. God's taking it seriously. We're the jokers. We're the bunch of jerks. Catch you next time. We'll talk about Jesus talking to the devil.